Jesus loved to tell stories about gardening, didn't he? Seems to be really interested in, fascinated by things that grow, things that plant. Think of the evocative image of the mustard seed that needs to go into the ground to die in order to grow and to bring new life. Think of all those images of harvests and trees. So much of Jesus is interested in gardening. Perhaps during the last few months, maybe if you've spent some time on furlough, or you've spent some time on lockdown, trapped in your own house, perhaps you finally got round to fixing the garden. Perhaps you've finally done the stuff you said you'd do for months, if not years, in the back garden. Or perhaps, like me, you actually haven't. You meant to, and you said at the beginning of lockdown, one of the projects will be to fix that wall, or to lay that patio, or to sort that lawn out. And you just haven't quite got round to it. And maybe you've discovered that actually it wasn't really the lack of time that meant you didn't do the jobs you didn't want to do in the garden. Maybe there was something else going on there. And don't get me wrong, I love gardening. And I too am fascinated by the things that Jesus is fascinated by. Things that grow. I love the way that Jesus uses the image of nature as a way of explaining the kingdom of heaven. Keeps coming back to these natural images. And in these days of instant online access, in these days of high-speed broadband and Netflix, and the ability to just choose whatever you want whenever you want it, maybe we need to return again to those natural images. Those images of things taking time, of the kingdom of heaven needing to be planted and then to slowly grow. It's certainly one of the things that we talk about a lot at All We Can, is that change takes time. Change is a long-term process. Change is about planting a seed now in the hope that maybe in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, maybe some future generation will get to reap the harvest. And that's why we're committed to long-term partnerships. It's why we're committed to building long-term relationships with the people we work with around the world. It's why when I'm able to talk about some of our partners in some of the places, I have to go and look up when we began our partnership with them. Because it was long before I joined All We Can. It was sometimes before any of the current staff joined All We Can. And so we've been building these relationships and helping to build up these organisations, to take them from the little seedlings, the little saplings, the little plants, to help them build into larger trees. Because we at All We Can love this image of gardening too. We too are quite taken with the idea of slowly building change. And it's change that we want to talk about today. It's a gospel of change that I want to bring to you as part of our harvest service. It seems very appropriate to be thinking about harvests and planting, and even in these strange times where maybe our harvest festivals are not quite the harvest festivals we've always had. They're harvest festivals like never before, as we find ways to gather despite all of the challenges that our society has been through in this 2020 year, this year of coronavirus, this year of lockdown. Despite all of that, we still see some power in the gospel message of change, the gospel of transformation. We have one of those amazing stories of change in today's gospel. We turn to John 6 and we hear this story of Jesus challenging his disciples, Jesus taking his disciples on to the next level. Because we have this moment, don't we, where Jesus is preaching and suddenly there's loads of people. And there's lots of people gathered around. But with the blessing, with the fact that we've gathered, with the fact that change is happening as people listen to Jesus' message, comes a practical need. We need to feed these people who have come. Yes, they've come to be ministered to by Jesus, but now they have a practical need. And that so easily takes me, again, back to the way that All We Can works. Gathering people together, building partnerships, building relationships, connecting people around the world. And then in those relationships, in those conversations, discovering what the practical need is for that community. So in the conversation we have with our long-term partner in Uganda, we want to build the relationship, we want to understand them, we want to understand their context, we talk about what it means to be connected, and then we say, what's the needs in this area? What are the things that people need? What are the things we need to change? And so Philip, doesn't he, urgent Philip in this John 6, he says, oh no, there's a problem, Lord. We need to fix the problem. Where do we buy bread for these people to eat? And Philip is thinking in those practical terms. And Philip is a reminder to all of us who like to think practically. We like to take a big picture vision and immediately say, yes, and how are we going to deliver that? Philip is one of those people who carries the clipboard to the demonstration. He comes and he says to Jesus, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. And this is where most of us perhaps are in terms of meeting practical need. It's where much of the history of international development has been in terms of meeting practical need. What we've thought about is how we might feed these people. How are we going to keep these people alive for a little bit longer? How much money are we going to need in order to meet the practical need? And so Philip has that sort of old school model, and maybe the model many of us default to when we're not careful about how we think about how we might do international aid, or how we might support the very poorest, even in our own communities. Which is we start by saying, well, we need to work out exactly how much money we need, and then we need to work out where we're going to go and buy that food or buy that aid. Then we get the Jesus moment. This brilliant moment in the story where Philip has brought his spreadsheet where he's worked out what 6 months' wages could buy and how much he might need to invest. And Jesus just says, hang on, what have they already got? Instead of us coming into their context, bringing all of our baggage and saying, how can we fix your problem? Why don't we ask these people what they're bringing? Why don't we ask if anybody has any food they're willing to share? And so they ask the question, don't they? And the famous little boy who's been the illustration of so many Sunday school lessons over the years comes forward with his loaves and his fish, and he offers that. He offers that generosity. And so this Jesus moment comes out of a moment of generosity and out of a moment of the local people offering what they have. And after more than 5 years working for All We Can, I can testify to the way that those Jesus moments happen around the world when those two things come together. When people are generous and when local people have a brilliant idea about how they might solve a problem. That is the All We Can model. That is the work we're doing in all sorts of different places all around the world, is taking what's on offer from local people and alongside the generosity of people here in the UK and around the world, transforming that into those little Jesus moments where suddenly everyone is fed, suddenly everyone's potential is fulfilled, suddenly this ordinary little gift of some loaves and some fish is transformed into the extraordinary, is transformed into that which feeds a whole people. We take what's already there, and in Jesus' hands, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. So those seeds that are there at the very beginning of our sermon, those seeds we talked about planting in the garden, the seeds that are still sitting in your shed waiting for you to plant them, the seeds that I need to go out and plant, those seeds are ordinary. And yet by the miracle of allowing them to go into the ground and spring up and water them, and the sunshine does its magic, and all sorts of goodness bursts forth into our gardens. And whether you're into vegetables and what you end up with is a great haul of carrots or leeks or potatoes, or whether you're into flowers and when you plant your seeds what you get is gorgeous poppies and delightful colours and bushes and shrubs and things that you can enjoy while you sit in your garden. Whichever of those it is, we witness a little version of that Jesus moment, don't we? in the ordinary becoming extraordinary. The seeds are ordinary in Jesus' hands. By the miracle of nature, they become extraordinary. Those loaves and fish are ordinary, and yet in Jesus' hands, in this Jesus moment, they become extraordinary. And maybe what the little boy does is inspire a whole movement of generosity amongst people. That's one explanation scholars offer for how Jesus might have fed the 5,000. It's a miracle, because what happens in that moment is the boy unlocks everybody's generous spirit. And suddenly there's an abundance of food. And suddenly it's not a spreadsheet, and shall we work out how many months' wages we'll need to feed these people. It's an abundance of generosity, and the ordinary becoming extraordinary. The local solution, solving the problem. And I want to just talk about one more thing that we might think of as very ordinary. An ordinary bicycle. We've reflected a bit on what change means as part of our sermon. And for us, at All We Can this year, change begins with a bicycle. That most ordinary of tools of transportation. That most normal of ways of getting around. Perhaps another thing that's been lying in the shed right next to those seeds you meant to plant for a few years. Perhaps for us in the UK, we think of the bicycle as a luxury item, or as something that a certain group of people are into, and you're either into bikes or you're not. Actually, what we've seen in the amazing work we're doing in Uganda is how the bicycle is not just a tool for transportation, it's a tool for transformation. In the hands of our incredible partners, Fabio, and the work that they're doing in local communities in Uganda, the bike becomes a way in which we break the cycle of poverty. Because what they're doing is supplying bikes to families who are living in really difficult circumstances. Some of the poorest families in some of the poorest communities in one of the poorest regions of Uganda, a community called Butagaya near Jinja in Uganda. And what they're doing, by supplying these bicycles, they're enabling young people to get to school. I was in Uganda just a few months ago, just the other side of lockdown and coronavirus, and I was able to meet some of the amazing people and the amazing communities that Fabio and that All We Can are working with. And what really struck me being there was how far apart everything is. The distances in this part of rural Uganda are huge, and many young people are dropping out of school just because of how far they have to travel to get to their school. So maybe they made it through primary school because that was a commutable distance, and then the nearest secondary school is actually 10, 12 kilometres away. And they don't have public transport that they can access, and they don't have access to any kind of vehicle, and so they have to walk. And so they're walking 2.5 hours each way every day. And eventually the grind of that, plus study, plus home life, plus chores, starts to grind away at them. And they just decide, you know what, it'd be easier not to go to school. It'd be easier not to invest in my future. And so in that context, the ordinary tool of the bicycle becomes extraordinary. Because it becomes about a young person's education. It becomes about transforming somebody who'll be trapped in the cycle of poverty because they dropped out of school at 13 and they have no future in their rural village. Or it'll become about somebody who was able to empower themselves to gain an education, to pursue their dreams. It'll become like the story of a young girl, Nawalat, who I met, who, because of her receiving a bicycle, has stayed in school. And so she's chasing her dream of becoming a nurse. She's enjoying chemistry. And she's enjoying being able to more than halve her journey to school time. And so she's able to commit to her future. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. And what really struck me about the bikes is that it's actually not just about a child's education. Yes, that's the principle behind the work that Fabio are doing. But actually the bike then becomes the tool for all the other things that the family needs to do. It becomes about so much more than a bike, and that's why we've called the campaign Change Begins with a Bike. Because then, actually, they're able to use this bicycle to help them transport goods to market. And so because they're able to take more goods to market, they're able to make a little bit more money, they're able to invest in the family home and in education materials for these children. Or perhaps they're able to get water from one of the nearby boreholes, and therefore, because the water the family is consuming and using is cleaner, because they're able to transport it over longer distances, the family's health improves, and so they're able to invest in their own future. So it starts with the bicycle, but it becomes about everything else. It's the something ordinary that becomes extraordinary. When people are generous, when people give and enable us to do that kind of work, and when local people bring a brilliant solution. When local people present their idea and say, got loaves and fish, or in this case, we've got a bike. Might that work? And then we're able to work together to scale that up, to see the ordinary become extraordinary, to see people's potential fulfilled, to not just feed people in the instant and the moment, but to see genuine transformation, to see the cycles of poverty broken. Maybe today that's you. Maybe you are the something ordinary that is being invited to offer ourselves into the hands of the Master. Maybe you've got your little loaves and fish that are your talents, your skills, your energy, your ideas, your time, your finances, and you can offer those today. Maybe you can offer something ordinary and make a huge difference. Maybe you, in the hands of Jesus, can move from the ordinary to the extraordinary. So we finish in Romans 12. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around kind of life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for God. Bless you, brothers and sisters. Amen.